All right, so next let's kick it on down to Lexington. We teased our interview, which will be coming up in just a moment here with Nick Roush, Kentucky Sports Radio. Always love having Nick on the show. Very entertaining guy who doesn't hold anything back here. But before we get to his interview, do want to make this announcement. So I had him on Monday early afternoon. Since that time, Will Levis has announced he is coming back for next season. That's a huge boost to Kentucky in their offense in year two under Liam Cohen. Year two, Will Levis. He's going to have to take his game to another level if Kentucky is going to potentially win another 10 games next season. He's got to cut back on the turnovers. But, that's typically what happens in year two. You get better in the system. You get better with the players around you. Now, Wandale Robinson, he's not going to be around. Josh Ali's off to the NFL. Chris Rodriguez, undecided at this point. But that's why it's going to be on Will Levis's shoulder to improve his stock and step up and be, the driving force of that offense. And at the end of the day, you look at what Kentucky had before Will Levis, it was a borderline travesty at the quarterback position. So he's added some stability. Now it's time for him to take his game up to the next level, and maybe we'll start to see that a little bit here in the bowl game against Iowa. And speaking of that game, real quick, Josh Ali, Isaiah Ipps, not be playing in the Citrus Bowl against Iowa. They were in a car accident. It's not life-threatening or anything, but just not going to be able to play. Liam Cohen announced that here on Monday, so that's a bummer for Kentucky fans. But the good news is Mark Stoops and company just signed the number 4 recruiting class in the SEC, and Nick Roush of Kentucky Sports Radio joined the show to break that all down. Hey, well, we're pleased to once again be joined by Nick Roush. Does an outstanding job for Kentucky Sports Radio, and he's a host of my favorite Kentucky sports podcast, the 11 Personnel Podcast. Give him a follow at Roush KSR. Nick, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Well, happy to be here. Happy to have a fan of 11 Personnel on the show. Even if you're lying, you're a very good liar.
No, I listen to you and Luckett all the time, man. I swear.
Well, I appreciate it. It's a little hectic this time of the year, but it's fun to get on here and talk a little ball with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the reason I wanted to have you on, Kentucky just had a historic signing class, probably the best class ever in program history, top 4 in the SEC. Did you ever think you'd live to see Kentucky finish top 4 in the recruiting rankings?
No. And that was also – before really getting to know how the rankings work, and especially when you're used to basketball, it only takes like a player or two to really kick things up a notch. Mm-hmm. But in football, you really do have to have a 20-person signing class with more than half of your guys 4-star or better. And Kentucky did that. I mean, we were recording a signing day special kind of podcast. It took till like 45 minutes in before we got to Barry and Brown, a 5-star guy on 3. Like that's kind of where we are. I never anticipated this day would happen, but the landscape has changed a lot. Kentucky's success plus the way that NIL works now, like just recruiting is completely different. And Mark Stoops, he is taking advantage of kind of every change along the way. And he's benefited from kind of the talent pool in Kentucky improving. So the Cats are in elite company now, and that's how you don't win games on signing day, but you do 2-3 years down the road. And Kentucky's really starting to stack some solid classes together to raise the floor of the football program.
Now, how much stress did 5-star Kiyaunta Goodwin put on Kentucky's coaching staff, and more importantly, on the crew over there at Kentucky Sports Radio?
Well, so Kiyaunta, his gym, Aspirations Gym, is a stone's throw from my house. It's only about 1.5 miles away in Louisville. And so I'd spend a good amount of time there. I've known Kiyaunta for a long time because he's been a recruit for seemingly forever. And part of me never really worried too much in that I thought that Vince Marrow had established a long enough relationship to kind of weather whatever storm. But this was our introduction to big boy recruiting, where on signing day, you might have 2 announcements. You might have flip it and flop it. It's a wild ride, and you just got to hold on for dear life. And that's what Kentucky did. You rarely have guys like Goodwin that are 6'8", 325 pounds that grow up right down the road. And that was the case. I mean, he's a top 20 guy by all standards. Now, he needs to have a lot of he lacks some football experience. But man, he's an uber talent at a position that, Kentucky's got a good reputation on the offensive line, and they're losing some of those guys. Darian Kennard, consensus All-American. He's going out the door. You had to get Goodwin to maintain that identity, that culture of the Big Blue Ball inside the Kentucky football program.
Now, this may be a tough question to answer, but if you could pinpoint maybe one or two, maybe even three things that really needed to take place for Kentucky to have such a historic signing class, what were the keys you think? Is it just the stability of Mark Stoops and his program? They had they were top 10 at one point this season. How did this all come about in your mind?
Well, some of it is kind of what I alluded to earlier, where you're stacking classes up on top of one another, and you've established yourself to a certain degree. So in Kentucky's case, they've established themselves as a premier place to develop trench football players. Deion Walker from Detroit, a lot of people thought when Steve Klingscale, Kentucky's primary recruiter in the area, a lot of people thought when he went to Michigan, they would lose out on that guy. It wasn't necessarily the one guy, but Kentucky had three noses from that area who have done well. Quentin Bohanna, drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. He's playing now. Marquand McCall, he's going to get drafted in the next go around. And then Justin Rogers, he hasn't started a single game for Kentucky, and he's already got billboards in Lexington. So some of that, one, I think the biggest part is you've established a culture where certain guys can see themselves being successful. Guys like Grant Bingham, who are four-star recruits, from Eastern Kentucky, who's going to be a great offensive guard on the Big Blue Ball in the future. I think the second part was what a lot of folks needed to see last offseason, and that was hiring Liam Cohen and then immediately producing results with Will Levis at quarterback. Kentucky needed to get better in the passing game, and you get better by signing guys on signing day. They don't get Barry and Brown out of Nashville Pro Cone High School without Liam Cohen's offense. Dane Key, who, you look at him on paper, he's a four-star, top 250 guy. You say, oh, well, he's a legacy recruit. South Carolina was pushing hard, but he was always going to end up at Kentucky. That's not necessarily the case. If Liam Cohen's doesn't come in and revitalize Kentucky's offense, that doesn't happen. And he's a guy, like, even with Wan'Dale Robinson this year, Kentucky needs a back shoulder fade receiver. Like, that's just, teams are going to force you to make plays with your outside receivers. Dane Key is the kind of guy that can do that. So I think those are the two biggest things. Is you've already got yourself well established in certain areas, but you needed to make that push by changing your offense, and then having a quarterback that is not just a one-year splash. He hasn't made it official, but he's going to come back for another season, and that gives you hope that, oh, well, I can catch passes from this guy next year. We can have a really, really talented team in the future. So, and then I'll throw in one more third piece: keeping Brad White. Brad White's not necessarily known for his recruiting prowess, but Kentucky needed some edge guys. He is their outside linebackers coach. He's the guy who helped Josh Allen become the 7th overall pick, and he's a real technician when it comes to that spot. They did well recruiting that guy, recruiting with him. He got Tyrese Fearbury from Pitt, who is a top 200 guy. They got a kid from Delaware who's pretty good. I don't know how many kids have ever been from Delaware that go to Kentucky, but White was able to make that happen. And it was 3 days before signing day. There's reports coming out like, well, he's in Baton Rouge, he might stay. But no, Brad didn't turn down Brian Kelly to stay at Kentucky. And I think that was a nice way to put the finishing touches on a really good class.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Brad White, because I was going to ask you about him and kind of tie that into Mark Stoops, where you see reports, you see LSU's interested, Florida's interested. This is where Kentucky's at. You have success on the field, people are going to come after your coaches. But what does it say about Kentucky that both these coaches decided to stay, keep building the program, and you're, like you said, you're stacking recruiting class on recruiting class? I mean, it's kind of a joke to say Kentucky's a basketball school now, and it's not been that way for several years. So I don't know, just I guess state of the program. How great is it now that Kentucky's a legit SEC program?
I did kind of let out a sigh of relief whenever I learned that Stoops was staying, because Man, ever since we started 11 personnel, maybe 2 years ago, and I've been doing plenty of Kentucky Sports Radio podcasts through the years, but this always felt like the big off season for Stoops in that timing is everything in college football. And in Stoops' case, he's getting a little bit older. Uh, and you could make the Brian Kelly argument that, well, has he reached his ceiling at UK? Is 9 wins? Is that all you can do? And you could see where one of these big jobs, I mean, the coaching carousel was absolute banana land. The all of the conditions on the outside were ripe for him to go elsewhere, but instead he got reassurances from the athletic department, from the university, that they could invest enough to keep up with the Joneses, because it's an arms race in this league.
Mm-hmm.
And he's proven that he can get the guys in there as long as he has the right resources. So not only did he get a contract extension, but I think the bigger thing is he was able to get an increase in his assistant pool salary, his assistant coaching salary pool. So like White, the number we heard was $2 million they were going to offer at LSU. He's not going to be making that at Kentucky, but he's going to be $1 million, $1.2 million a year kind of coordinator. I expect Liam Cohen to get a raise. And then Kentucky lost John Summerall to Troy. He helped recruit even after he left Troy. They got a guy from South Georgia, defensive lineman Quintel Jones, and then flipped a two-way guy that I'm really high on, Jacoby Albert from Auburn, who could play safety or receiver. So you lost a valuable part of your staff. But with this increase in assistant coaches' salaries, you can still go out and spend, $600,000-$700,000 on a guy to come in and fill that void. So it's Kentucky is in a great spot. The more I've been doing this, the more I get a feel on what you need to be successful. I mean, Kentucky, man, they're checking a lot of the right boxes. And I think the next big one that he needs to check off is you need to get some sort of generational type talent quarterback from the state of Kentucky. That's the one thing he hasn't been able to do, is to get a passer from the state. He's been able to get some success in the transfer portal. I think the last piece, the kind of Ole Miss to Sugar Bowl, historic kind of season, I think that has to be getting one of these talented passers from the state to stay at home and make some more history. Even bigger part two, SEC, Mike, this time next year, Mark Stoops is going to have more wins than Bear Bryant at Kentucky, winningest coach in UK football history. That's pretty crazy to say 10 years down the road, but he's going to be the longest tenured, greatest coach. We're in the golden years of Kentucky football. And man, I know me, along with everybody else in the Big Blue Nation, just is over the moon right now, overjoyed by what's happening in Lexington.
Well, if I may poke you just a moment there, of course, Tennessee beat Kentucky on the field this season, but Mark Stoops signed as many Tennessee natives in one family as Josh Heupel was able to do in the entire recruiting class. So I wanted to ask you about Kentucky coming down there and getting the Wade twins and, just planting that flag in the state of Tennessee. And this is not the first time they've done it now. This is several classes in a row. How big is coming down into Tennessee, and in particular where I live, the mid-state area, the Nashville area, making their presence known? How valuable is that going to be for Mark Stoops and company?
They're never going to say it publicly, but it is significant. It is important, because that's the thing of all. Like, if you look at the last 5 years, Kentucky's had a better record by Tennessee, and it's not even really close. But they've only got 2 wins to show for it, and that's the part that really stings. So where do you try to cut them back? You get them in recruiting, and they haven't won them all. They've won some. They were able to keep Octavius Oxendine a few classes ago. They lost on Tyler Barron, but they also got Trayvon Ribka, who they're really high on next year. Getting the Wade twins, especially early, they committed, I want to say in the spring, maybe it was like April or May. Yeah. And that was early, and Heupel was really making a push. But even in spite of losing, I mentioned Clinkscale earlier. Clinkscale was the kind of mid-Tennessee area, but Cohen came in, Scott Woodward, his buddy from their UMass days. They were roommates together at UMass. He's the receivers coach now. And those guys went into Tennessee and made sure that they were able to get the Wades and get Brown. And where Brown really jumps off the page to you from an athletic standpoint and just here's speed we can't coach. The Wades have there's a certain intangible about them where you just feel like they're going to be successful. Like there's just a way that they go about their business that I think really fits the culture of the Kentucky football program. And in Destin, he was a quarterback that set a ton of records with his legs. And that's why a lot of folks believe he'll end up moving to like an H-back or tight end or something like that. I don't know what his future holds offensively, but I know that he's going to make an impact somehow. And Keaten Wade is kind of the opposite, where instead of being real raw, he's a very polished edge prospect. And that's a tough position to learn because they ask so much of you in a 3-4 defense. But I do think that he can come in, he can contribute some as a true freshman. And I really like what they're bringing to the table. It's not necessarily the same thing as the Pouncey twins at Florida back in the late 2000s, but I do think those guys are going to be leaders for this football program for the foreseeable future.
Now, if there's one or two guys maybe that you think in this signing class that are going to have the biggest impact for Kentucky on the field next season, do any names stand out to you?
That will make the impact or will not?
Will immediately.
Will. So Goodwin is one of those that I think is a guy that'll play, probably not like day one starter. Darian Kennard got thrown around a lot because he came in and rotated in a ton as a true freshman. And, he was kind of trading off role. I could see that being a similar role where he's not a full-time starter, but he's going to play a good amount and then become a full-time guy because he does have all of the physical tools. He just needs he just needs football snaps. He hasn't played a ton of football. A lot of his recruiting rankings based on what he can do in a gym and not necessarily what he's put on tape. So he needs to get a lot of reps, but I ultimately think he's going to be doing stuff next fall. I mentioned Wade earlier, but Kobe Albert, man, this kid, he's one of the few guys where you watch their tape and you notice his vertical leap. Like that's just not something you normally say. But his athleticism is impressive. They're thin at safety. And I think if he comes in and plays, he can be an early impact guy as a safety. And in addition to that, Barry Brown, he's not polished either, but you don't need to be polished to run jet sweeps. You
Right.
just got to be faster. Those three are probably the ones that I think are most likely. Now, I know there's still a few lines cast out there. They're waiting to see if somebody will take the bait. Davison Igbunison, a lot believe it's going to be either Ole Miss or Kentucky. He's announced at the All-American Bowl. Maybe he could also be an impact safety. And there's another edge that's currently committed to Iowa State, who's signing in February, R. Mason Thomas from Fort Lauderdale. Maybe he's another guy that could come in because they're going to need some outside linebackers to come in and play. And so I think either of those guys also has a shot as well.
Now, hey, this is a hell of a class by Kentucky, no doubt, but there's always needs that have yet to be filled. Maybe it's outside linebacker, like you're saying, but that's what I wanted to ask you. Is there a position group or two that you really expect Kentucky to really attack with the national signing day in February or the transfer portal before the spring practice begins?
Yeah, they lost out on one of their guys. It was Kentucky versus Michigan State for Chris Bogle, the Florida transfer at edge. And you could make an argument that Kentucky and Michigan State were probably the best transfer portal schools in the country last year, as far as having success with guys who were at other schools the year prior. So I think Kentucky's going to hit the portal hard for corners. They need at least one more corner, particularly on the boundary. They've recruited a JUCO guy, Zoff Frazier, but you just JUCO, you don't know until you know. So
Yeah.
I expect them to get another corner from the portal, maybe another receiver as well, and maybe an offensive tackle too. Might try that. Some of it's going to depend. You still have to wait on decisions from who's going to stay, who's going to go. The thing that's nice about the portal too, Mike, is it's never ending. Like Kentucky did not expect to get Dare Rosenthal, and that came about in like June, and then
Right.
he starts every game for him at left tackle. So the portal, we're still in a wild west of sorts, trying to figure out and pin this all down. I know a lot of Kentucky fans wanted Eli Ricks because of the
Yeah.
success with Kelvin Joseph and getting the LSU guys. But, Alabama, that rich is going to get richer. But there's
Hmm.
surely some other guys out there. The one that is definitely a wishful thinking, too, is another LSU guy, Kayshon Boutte. I've heard some Alabama whispers for him. Man, Brian Kelly, dude, if you're going to do any recruiting at all this year, go dance with him. Like that guy, that guy is so good. That guy is so good. Wherever he's playing next year, he's going to be maybe the best player on the team. So the transfer portal, it's wild stuff. But you know what? It keeps us busy year round. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, no doubt. A fantastic Brian Kelly dance reference. But hey, last question for you, Nick. I really appreciate all your time. They throw all this at us, the coaching carousel, the recruiting. We still got a bowl game here. So we got a bowl
Yeah.
game coming up right around the corner. Kentucky versus Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. Iowa, I think, is a top 15 team. Uh, how do you like the odds of Kentucky to get win number 10, which would give Mark Stoops a 2-year contract extension? Man, he's got the best contract in college football. No doubt. No wonder he stayed in Lexington. You know what?
Yeah, yeah. I love the matchup because they play the style of football Kentucky wants to play. Some
Mm-hmm.
might call it boring. I just call it a good old fashioned slobber knocker. And really, it's very basic, dumb analysis. But if Kentucky doesn't turn the ball over, they win this game by a ton and they run away with it because Iowa's offense is inept. Their 1,000-yard running back opted out of the bowl game. They're not going to be able to score points unless they do it with defensive touchdowns. If you had any fun the day after Thanksgiving, the Nebraska-Iowa game was just a calamity. I mean, you had a punt return touchdown for Iowa. I mean, it was hilarious watching that game unfold. But that's what Iowa does. They wait for you to make mistakes and then they take advantage of them. They're very opportunistic. But Kentucky, knock on wood, they've taken care of the balls of late, and they've really. I know the opponents weren't of the same caliber in the month of November, but I want to say they were averaging, like 450 yards of offense and 38 points in those last 4 games. It's obviously a different level of opponent, but
Mm-hmm.
the way the offense has been clicking, the dynamic athletes, like Iowa isn't used to going up against Wandale Robinson, even though they
Right.
did like a year or two ago. Will Levis, this game's kind of personal for him. This was his first career start, but most importantly, a lot of these games come down to will to want to. I know people don't like to talk about that and lead up to bowl games, but like throughout Mark Stoops' tenure, he's carried a lot of baggage on the player's behalf. Whenever they would talk about Florida streaks and Tennessee streaks, he would stand up for them and say, hey, my guys don't deserve to carry that burden. I'll do it. They put it all on me.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't lost 30 games in a row. They might have lost 2 or 3, but they haven't lost those games in a row. He's really took a lot to get them to this point, and now going up against his alma mater. And the Iowa football means a lot to the Stoops family. There was 14 years where at least one Stoops was on that campus, either playing or coaching, from 78, 79, all the way to the early 90s. This football game means a lot to them. Their dad was buried with Mark's jersey and Bob's Rose Bowl ring in his casket. This game is going to be emotional for Mark Stoops. And these players, they really want to go out and get a win for him. And I think ultimately, all things equal, that's going to do more than enough to get Kentucky a victory down in the Citrus Bowl in Orlando.
All right, he's Nick Roush. Give him a follow at Roush KSR Kentucky Sports Radio. And don't forget, check out the 11 Personnel podcast he does with Adam Luckett. Terrific stuff. As always, Nick, I really appreciate you joining the show.
Hey, thanks, SEC, Mike. Go Cats.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Nick for joining the show. Really appreciate it. I know the Kentucky fans that tune in for the show will love that one. Hey, it's a great time to be a Kentucky Wildcat. It's stability up there. It's stacking class after class. Each one gets better than the last. And hey, Kentucky, I said all the show, they ain't just a basketball school anymore. And if you're still thinking that, I can't help you at this point.